So we've all seen the theories that there is a gigantic ice wall around the world. It's encompassing all of the continents, and perhaps even more continents are held outside of the ice wall. We don't know. There is a group that's speculating what is actually outside of the ice wall. There's a gigantic project that goes deeply into it. I found a creator that goes in depth into this project and details some of it. So we're gonna go ahead and watch that together. Let's go.
The Antarctic. A frozen wasteland at the very bottom of our beautiful planet, spanning 5,500,000 square miles in size, which is 40% larger than all of Europe, and sitting at a latitude of -69.6 and a longitude of 0. This enigmatic behemoth of ice and snow takes the place of our 7th and least populated continent, and in the grand scheme of things, we really don't know much about it. No one lives there full time, save for the 1,000 or so researchers and scientists stationed. No one's allowed to visit on their own, and in school and life, we're not taught any usable information about it. This strange land has captured the eye of many over our world's history, causing some of the greatest feats of exploration to date. But something still leaves skeptics and theorists alike asking questions about the true nature of the Antarctic. Tales of old forgotten lands, far beyond this proverbial wall of ice.
Let me just say before we get into further, anything that nations around the world all unanimously agree upon is kind of suspect to begin with. So the fact that so many nations have agreed to leave Antarctica off limits is very strange to me.
Stories of strange beings and creatures that inhabit those lands, and whispers of entire civilizations past the snow-covered mountains and icebergs. Flora, fauna, humans, and entire continents with their own cultures, their own histories, their own foundations, and their own scientific rules and laws of nature. What if I told you that there is a world, or worlds, that exist beyond the wall of ice in the Antarctic? A world that plays home to millions of lost civilizations and millions more of new civilizations. Prehistoric animals and giant arachnids, dragons and sea creatures, gnomes and goblins, orcs and blimiers, islands and continents, magic, spells, wars, geopolitical turmoil. It all exists in these lands beyond ours. You would think I'm crazy, right? Maybe not. I guess we're all kind of crazy for watching this. In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at this alleged lore of all these creatures and lands and cultures and the histories of how they were created, found, and how they're being hidden in modern day. All of these places that take place beyond Antarctica and why we can't go there, what possibly is out there, and the amazing and teeming life that allegedly exists. And hopefully I'll be stringing it together in a way that is understandable and easy to follow along, because trust me, it is a lot. If you enjoy speculative history and speculative evolution, then this is the video for you. You have found a gold mine. Hopefully you enjoy it. Now, are there actually land masses and continents and animals and all that stuff beyond the ice wall? No, there's probably not. But it's really fun to sit here for hours and weeks on end and think about it and write lore about it. And that's what's happened here. And that, my friends, is what I love. I mean, in our known world, we talk of extraterrestrials, and the words extraterrestrial just means not of our Earth. But what if that just means it's beyond our known Earth? And the planets that exist beyond the ice wall are where those extraterrestrials are from.
How much of this is going to be outlandish and unrealistic versus how much is going to be plausible? I've looked into this briefly, and I've even done a video on the associated conspiracy theory iceberg that goes along with it, that's kind of synonymous and living within their world. But it didn't necessarily go into the actual world, the continents, the land masses, the animals. So it will be interesting to see where they take all this. But the associated conspiracy chart also seemed to have a lot that was grounded in plausibility. So yeah, it'll be curious to see how much is realistic in this.
Alright, so the map that I'm going to be using for this video is going to be in the description below. There's a Google Drive link with an HD quality map. You can zoom up and see all the different lore if you want to. And I'll also be getting information from the World Beyond the Ice Wall wiki, which is a huge help and a very fun deep dive if you're bored on every single night of your life like me and just want something to look at to read and not get bored. Anyways, both those things will be in the description below if you want to.
I want to take a moment to acknowledge this man's marvelous mustache. It is actually very difficult to pull off just a mustache, and he rocks it really well. So props, my man.
Go check it out. And major shout outs to the YouTuber Italian PNC for his covering of these maps and kind of little explanations. That way I can make sense of all the things that I'm going to be talking about today. It made it a lot easier. Thank you, bro. Thank you for you're doing the Lord's work. To begin with, I just want to explain the theory in the most layman's terms possible, just to make it as easy for you as I can. That way you can kind of get a baseline for how the video is going to go, and I kind of just want to set the video on a correct course. If you do want to skip ahead to the creature and the land explanations and the history and stuff, again, check the timestamps. This beginning part will be the prehistory and the basic overview. In this theory, the actual shape of the world is not a sphere like we've been told.
What on earth would prompt a shape like this?
It's not a flat Earth or anything, actually. That's not involved in the theory. But instead, it's more of a snowman shape, with planets stacked on top of each other, connected like a snowman. Earth and all the stuff that we know about it, its 7 continents, all that stuff, it sits on the top of the snowman, where a head of an actual snowman would be. And to the south, or the bottom of our planet Earth, below Antarctica, is the next planet, the body of the snowman. This planet is called Atlas. Atlas is a much larger spherical planet as well, about twice the size of Earth, but below Atlas, on its southern tip, beyond its border, is the biggest planetoid body in this grouping, known as Akupara. So Earth, Atlas, Akupara, this makes the giant planetoid body, and all the mysterious lands and creatures that I'll be discussing exist beyond Earth and in Atlas or Akupara. So this planetoid body is the 3 planets tall, and if you were to look at it from a top-down perspective, you would see the various rings or ice circles that exist to separate the different planets. Like in the main map, you can see how the middle concentric circle is Earth, the one on the outside is Atlas, and the one on the outside is Akupara, and beyond that is a land of mysterious, very weird effects known only as the Wastes. Which again, they also have their own lore. Don't worry about it. Lore, there's lore everywhere, okay? But this collection of planets, this body, this snowman, is known as Gaia or Gaia. Now,
The only reason that this model would work is if the center of gravity would be still in the center of the planet Earth. But in order for there to be the ability to ride along the middle Atlas and even the Akupara bottom, there would also need to be a center of gravity pulling everything in there as well. It doesn't necessarily conflict with it, but there would need to be another source of gravity keeping everything in it, correct? Maybe that's compensated for.
Earth and Atlas are orbited by their own unique suns. They have their own rotations and everything like that. But the bottom planet, Akupara, is so large, so expansive, that it actually has 2 suns that rotate around it. That's how much light it needs. And an important thing to note that in this lore system, the only planetary body that has a moon is Earth. There's no more moons of note. We're unique with that. That so far is simple enough, just a planetoid snowman shape with Earth, Atlas, and Akupara, and the wastes surrounding it. Now there's said to be other planetary shapes like this and snowmen out in our outer space beyond, but those will be mentioned in a different video. That's not the focus. Gaia, our planetary snowman, is the focus. The outer wastes beyond all of their planets on the outskirts of everything are said to extend out infinitely into a flat plane that kind of eventually warps back on itself, creating an eggshell-like thing around the planets. Essentially, the outer wastes are the eggshell, and the Earth Atlas and the Akupara, we are the yolk inside the egg. Inside the lore of the Beyond the Ice Wall wiki and the lore system, a substance known as aether fills up the space beyond our planets. Aether essentially keeps everything suspended. It's kind of like the glue that holds our metaphysical realities together. Aether itself is more dense in higher elevations, which keeps things more normal and more sane and less enigmatic. Which means that Earth, which sits at the top of the elevation, has the most aether, meaning we have the most normal realities and less.
So maybe that's what works as their form of gravity, because, and circling back a little bit to what I was curious of earlier, the theory of ether or aether, it has long been speculated as another force that we don't quite fully understand yet. So that's interesting. That could be an overlapping here, but it does seem perhaps that the ether could be used in forming the snowman of, just keeping its shape.
Less magic, less effects, and that sort of thing. Further down you go beyond the ice wall to Atlas and Akupara, the less aether there is, which means there's more magic, there's more strange effects, there's more weird plants and animals and cultures, and it just gets weirder and stranger the further down you go.
They got it iceberg style. That's pretty cool. The further down you go, the more outlandish and wild it gets. That's an interesting system.
With less aether means the laws of nature and the fabrics of reality don't mean as much. And that's why the two main planets beyond Earth have all the strange stuff I'm going to mention in this video. Aether directly affects things like gravity and light and reality stabilization, which is why strange things do happen in Earth, weird, odd things that can't be explained, but not enough to where it would cause alarm. But these strange things that happen here happen more often as we go down. But just know that the most important part of the aether in this lore is how it affects magic and energies and vibrations. Things like psychic communications and palm readings and future telling and soothsaying and all that kind of stuff, that happens more and it's more realistic where there's no aether or where there's less aether. Things like projections and ghosts and haints and everything like that, beings of the ethereal realm, they can exist outside of the aether, which is why here on Earth you have sightings of like Bigfoot and ghosts and that kind of thing, and magic that happens but can't be explained because there's so much aether here that keeps everything in line. Okay, so just to make sure you're still with me here and you haven't clicked off the video and you're not going insane, let's recap a few things. In the world behind the ice wall lore, Earth, Atlas, and Akupara are on top of each other like a galactic snowman. They're connected by their southern poles, and beyond those walls of ice, or walls or borders or whatever, is how you get to the different planets. Everything is surrounded by this aether material, this invisible strand that keeps us all together, and where there's aether, there's normalcy, and the further down you go, the less aether there is, therefore the less normalcy there is. Those wastes on the outer edges of the map, they come out and they make an eggshell around our Gaia, our planetary snowman, and the planets that I just talked about act as the yolk inside, and the aether material that keeps it all together acts as the egg whites, that liquid that keeps everything together. In this lore system as well, there's another substance that's pretty similar to aether, but it's called Azoth, and it's kind of like the anti-aether. It's the exact opposite. Azoth is essentially this substance that flows through all matter. It's power, and it's in very high
It's the Force. It is the Force.
concentration at the very center of our Earth, specifically in Agartha. I probably just woke up Wendigoon saying that. But anyways, Azoth gives people this energy, this life force, this power, and the aether, as I said earlier, kind of limits that magic, that infinity. So it's always the Azoth and the aether kind of dueling in this cosmic battle of sorts for power and for domination. Think of it as matter and antimatter. They're all doing their own thing, and it's all helping the world or hurting the world show its magic or hide its magic and those kind of properties. You still with me? Please? So what I've just described is actually the simplest way I can very briefly summarize this theory and the lore therein. Things exist beyond our reality in these faraway lands beyond the ice wall, and those are the things that I'm going to get into in this video. But now that we have all the pre-stuff out of the way, that's just the basic tutorial of the theory. You need to put your tinfoil hats on And you need to get ready, because I'm about to get into the lands, the creatures, and the histories and all that of these civilizations in the second planet under Earth, known as Atlas. So the planet Atlas, which is of course the body of the snowman, sits right below us and is accessible beyond our ice caps, our ice walls. And there are actually several different ways in the lore where you can get through the ice wall to explore these faraway distant lands. And before I get to the actual lands, I want to explain those gates a little bit, that way you can kind of get a little premise of what we're going for. The gates are the Sentinel Gate, the Tiger's Gate, the Serpents Gate, and the Leviathan's Gate. Those are what they've been called, and as you can see in the image, they are labeled here. I'm going to be referencing this map a lot. Get used to it, because that's one of the only references we have. So these gates play a massive role in understanding why certain people are in these lands in Atlas and how they got found. Sentinel's Gate is located at the southern part of the ice wall. The terrain here is pretty flat, dotted with small ponds and marshlands. In these swampy marshlands lives a species of penguin that is much wiser, much more evolved than the penguins that we know. They are the Sentinel penguins. Of course, that is where the Sentinel Gate gets its name from. The very first people thought to have found the ice wall and this break in between, the Sentinel Gate, were the Proto-Yagan, I'm sorry if I'm butchering that, Proto-Yagan sailors. Those sailors got horrifically off course and they ended up getting lost and sailing directly through the Sentinel's Gate. A small number of these sailors stayed here and kind of set up camp and colonized the immediate areas. There's not really much plant life to speak of here at Sentinel's Gate because the land is dotted with just lakes and rivers and ponds and things like that. But those penguins that I mentioned that live here, those are another story entirely. They stand at 2.5 meters tall and are extremely, extremely aggressive. They're literally known for how mean they are and how they'll go out of their way to attack people that they see. The Sentinel penguins...
Hold on, 2.5 meters tall? That's 6, 8 something? 8 foot tall penguins? Aggressive, nasty, huge penguins? No, thank you. What? Yeah, okay, so I didn't even see that. Okay, so that's a real size comparison here between an average person with a spear against these Sentinel penguins. Oh my gosh, that's wild.
Usually spend days at a time standing completely still, just idling there in this very scary looking position until they're ready to attack their prey. One thing that you'll find in all of these different lands at the gates and beyond the gates into Atlas and beyond is that these places have tribes. They have native people that were settled there a long, long time ago. And I'll try to get into as much deep lore of that as I can. There is a lot of it, and I will not be able to get it all in, so I apologize for the lore purists. I'll just be glossing over some of them, but I'll mention the ones that I think are important. For instance, here at the Sentinel Gate, the Senti people are who kind of run the joint. Each of these tribes is split up by chieftains, and a chieftain rules a certain part of the tribe, and these Senti people are known for not getting cold. Obviously, the areas around here are pretty frigid, and they can get really low in temperature, and these people are known for being hardy. They don't even wear coats. Kind of just walk around naked and they don't even get cold at all. There are other smaller little islands that dot the Sentinel's Gate that were founded by Argentinians, by people from Germany, by people from Spain. All sorts of colonies like that were started many years ago, and the people that allegedly live there now are descended from those. Anyways, that was Gate 104. The next gate I want to mention is the Tiger's Gate, and you can kind of see where this is going just by the name. Now, this break in the ice wall is on the western side of it, so it's on this side, but I think it's that side for you. Whatever. This break in the wall is known for its hilly and harsh environments. Hot springs, volcanoes, and running rivers run wild through here, and the land is untamed. And of course, the gate is named after the tiger species that lives here, known as the Tiger del Glacier, which is just the tiger of the glacier. These are physically massive animals, not too dissimilar to the saber-toothed tigers that we know. These things possess extreme hunting capabilities, and they stalk their prey for days. They can jump and bound like an insane thing. The native peoples of this Tiger's Gate area are very large, very hardy people, and they're actually so strong naturally that they fight these tigers in gladiatorial combat in some of the colonies, which I think is pretty cool. The peoples brandish obsidian weapons because obsidian is rich in the grounds here, and they wear the skins of the tigers that they kill. The majority of humans who have settled the Tiger's Gate area are of Spanish descent. save for a few British colonies here and there, but where are those not? The people who live on the islands of the Tiger's Gate make their way, get through life, by fishing and hunting. They are specifically known here to hate and detest pirates. They can't stand the idea of them, so they always try to ward them away and keep them off. The Tiger's Gate is really not a very common gate to go through if you're an explorer going beyond the ice wall, partially because of how dangerous it is to get there, and then the people not being too welcoming of pirates and those who travel there. Moving over to the eastern side of the ice wall, we have another very difficult, but probably the most famous exit through the wall itself, known as the Leviathan's Gate. This entrance is known far and wide, from sailor to sailor, for the depths of its water and the things that hide beneath. The water is extremely choppy and aggressive, and giant leviathans and mosasaur and fish swim in the surrounding areas. Weird-looking whales swim around this area as well, and you can hear their calls if you get close enough. Those who do live in the Leviathan's Gate area are typically from French or Scandinavian descent, but there are other varying ethnicities as well. The land here in the Leviathan's Gate is jagged, it's coarse. It's like the mountains appear to be teeth, clenching down on any passerbys. The Leviathan's Gate is extremely dangerous to those who are not used to its waters or those who are accidentally stuck there, and it's known to be a very deadly watery grave for many a sailor. Strange things lurk in the waters below the Leviathan's Gate. The final, and the most popular of these gates, is the Serpent Gate. This is the entrance through the wall on the northern sector. And the Serpent's Gate looks completely different from the other areas I've described. The region is covered in these dirt and rock outcroppings that appear to be stalactites on the ground. These weird mounds are located on the grassy plains that make up the Serpent's Gate. Now, fitting with the theme of the other entrances, like the Sentinel, the Leviathan, and the Tiger Gate, this Serpent Gate is named for the large sea serpents that swim around the waters here, as well as other giant snake-like entities that call this gate home. Large labyrinthine snakes swim in the water, and they contort their bodies in these mesmerizing fashions, shimmering and shining in the delight of many a sailor, and also the death of them too. The Serpent's Gate is mainly home to descendants of Asian and European countries, but there are other places as well, like a few South Americans and so on. And fitting with the other gates, there is a tribe of native people here known as the Serpentese, and this group is hallmarked by their clothes. They wear the skins and the scales of the serpents that they kill in battle. They wear them as sort of a trophy, kind of like how old hunters used to wear the hides of the animals they killed in the frontier days, which also, that's just pretty cool. Like, imagine walking around with this like blue snakeskin cloak on.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. And all things considered, the Serpent's Gate is normally monikered as the easiest gate to get through to get to Atlas. So anyways, those were all the gates. That's how you get through the ice wall. Those are the openings, the breaks in the ice. That's how you get.
So he mentioned that that last one was the easiest to get through, which kind of surprises me. It did seem like some of the others were a little bit more land-based. They had the tigers, which obviously isn't a land, or it isn't a sea-based thing. But I am curious how the governments approach these things. Is this just all part of the treaty to stay off of Antarctica? Do they keep this off of, like, how do they deter people from approaching these things? At least according to the lore, obviously.
Thoth is first, and it is nicknamed by people who were there and travelers as the Nomad Continent. The lands of Thoth were settled by peoples from South America over 8,000 years ago, and more recently, they were discovered by our good pal Magellan back in the 1500s. Allegedly. Now, sailing the seas beyond the Antarctic Ice Wall is very dangerous for many reasons. Giant dinosaur-like creatures, humanoids that have no head but their eyes are on their torso, carnivorous environments that want to eat you. These are just a few snafus explorers like Magellan might encounter in this new world. By the year 1830, the nomad continent of Thoth was lived in and inhabited by several different ethnicities from across our known Earth. Now, Thoth was first inhabited by the Yagan-descended Bay Ninjor peoples, which again, there are a lot of pronunciations in this video, and I will be getting a lot of them wrong. because there's no rules for what's beyond the ice wall people. But those Yagan people were the first to come through the Sentinel Gate way back in the day, and the Sentinel Gate, of course, is right up by Thoth. The natives here are known as the Norgdri, the Fasciati, and the Bay Nungior, all of which descended from some sort of Norseman tribes from Europe. The land of Thoth itself is wide and expansive, with tons of different climates and cultures and animals. The landmass and the continent itself that Thoth is known to move. It physically moves in the water, and it does full rotations around the ice wall every so often. A full rotation around the planet of Atlas takes it about 1,500 years to complete, which seems like a long time, but that's really not that long in the grand scheme of things. But for the majority of the land, it is a cool and temperate place with thick biomes of lush vegetation and animals that scurry beneath the leaves. Hidden rivers and lakes and ponds dot this landscape, and the summers are warm and the winters are cold. And because of this, the natural animals that are from Thoth have adapted to change their environments based on the changes of the seasons and the fact that the entire continent rotates around Atlas, which is crazy. Thoth is home to a multitude of strange creatures and entities that I can't explain all of them. These animals often live alongside the nomads that inhabit the continent. The Beoshad is a large marsupial creature that lives in the Follower Islands off of Thoth. It's known to be fast and aggressive and stealthy, and nearly silent when it walks and hunts. The Hargul is a large armored mammal that kind of resembles a shaggy bear. The biggest distinction between the Harguls and the bears is that Harguls have these large chitin armor plates that are on them, sort of like dinosaur armor, and these plates protect their upper halves. Northern terror birds also inhabit the...
So I can appreciate that these aren't just Pokemon that have outlandish features. A lot of them look somewhat realistic. I mean, they're obviously a little bit strange, but that's the whole thing. They're plausible but strange. So pretty decent job so far from what I'm seeing from the animals.
Upper reaches of Thoth, and these are similar to the creatures that roamed Earth many millions of years ago. Now, the majority of the creatures that reside on the continent of Thoth are mammal or bird-like in appearance and their nature. And you'll notice themes as we go to the different continents. Some can be birds, some can be lizards, some other kind of animals there are, dinosaurs and whatnot, which I guess dinosaurs are just big lizards, but I digress. Thoth is one of the more normal kind of places that you'll hear in this video beyond the ice wall and in Atlas. So just buckle up because it's just going to get even crazier.
Okay.
As we move down over to our next landmasses, Min and Mnevis and the Avalons. So Min and Mnevis and the Avalons are two separate island peninsulas that exist over this direction from Thoth. Min and Mnevis is known far and wide as the Isles of Deception, as all the natural wildlife that inhabits its islands is known for their camouflage and their ability to blend in with their surroundings. But specifically, the most enigmatic feature is that the plants on the island will look like animals, and the animals will look like plants. All living beings on the Isle of Deception have kind of adapted their bodies to warp and change their chemistry to look completely different and take the appearance of completely different things. And because of this natural effect, not much is really documented about the Isles of Deception. All we know is the tales that the sailors have of how you shouldn't go anywhere near it because you can't trust anything on them. Moving over to the Avalons, these are twin land masses that are kind of right next to each other, and these Avalons are really full of strange and interesting entities. The two land masses themselves have been nicknamed the Nexus of Fantasies, which is kind of a crazy name, can't even lie. And when you hear what I'm about to say, you'll understand why it's called the Nexus of Fantasies. It is said in the great histories of the world beyond the ice wall that these lands, the Avalons, were founded by Camelot. That's right, the original kingdom of Camelot is said to have founded the Avalon lands here. And their descendants in this modern day still live there. Allegedly, this happened because in the olden days, the two sister islands of the Avalons were once connected to the ice wall, and the kingdom of Camelot, when it disappeared and left in disgrace, ended up finding it, staying there, and then continental drift happened, and that's how we get the Avalons where they're at now. When the Avalons split from the ice wall, they were obviously icy and frozen. They changed when they moved further south, and now they're mossy and primeval and almost something you'd see in a storybook. Thick fog
Yeah.
and trees and rivers and valleys and everything of that nature flows through these sister islands. Misty skies and steep waterfalls and dragons and knights and that sort of thing is what inhabits the Avalons. Creatures
Real
that
fantasy
look
land.
to be out of fantasy novels take their home here. Giant beasts of fantastical proportions are said to live in the trees as well. And everything here, like I said, is just living up to the name, the Island of Fantasies. It just makes sense. It seems like this medieval amazing heaven you could visit. The people that live here now are descendants, like I said, from the feudal European people that settled the area, and they still kind of behave the same way. They have battles and armor and shields and spears, and they're not really evolved to the degree that Earth is. Further below the lands of the Avalons is a place called Arthornia, which again, this lore is crazy. Arthornia is another land that is said to be started or founded by an old world tale from Earth. It's said that their foundation goes all the way back to Merlin and King Arthur, and all the people that followed them left and they came down here in disgrace. Arthornia is home to massive forests, just giant proportions, and deep rocky valleys. A race of Neanderthal-like natives lives in these valleys as well, and they live in small huts. The full reaches of Arthornia are not fully known, just because there's not enough people to go searching for it. Moving over, we have the beautiful lands of the Dazhboga. This is a massive island chain, kind of off by itself in the ocean, and the islands themselves are made out of these weird crystal-like things. These crystalline rocks glow extremely bright against the sun that orbits Atlas, and this causes many different colors to reflect and to refract on the ground and towards passerbys. Ruins of great and ancient civilizations are here on this crystal island, yet no one knows where they came from. Moving further around, we get to a place known only as the Islands of the Blessed. These lands are not connected by actual geography, by culture, or by people. They're just kind of all there together, so they're all lumped in to the Islands of the Blessed. The environment in some of these lands is so lush and good for growing vegetation. In fact, you can fully grow plants in just a mere few days here. Because of this, the archipelagos on these islands are teeming with large trees and other sorts of plants and vegetables and fruits. There's an island in this chain called Genro that is so thick with brush that you can't even inhabit it. The entire island is just trees and leaves and vines. People have attempted...
That's actually something I was curious of. You have that fantasy land and maybe another area that really hasn't been colonized or utilized to what I would expect advanced beings to take over and utilize, essentially. You know, just like you look at every continent on Earth, we've colonized to some degree. So are these land masses off limits? Are they just too difficult to inhabit? I'm curious how that's supposed to be.
To burn the vegetation and kind of move on to the island, but it all just grows back in a day. There are also other islands, in the Islands of the Blessed, like the Malandantes and the Bamboo Celestes. These islands are covered in seagrass and bamboo forests, again, teeming with life. Several of the islands here are covered fully in gigantic flowers and Venus flytraps and things of that nature too. Overall, the Islands of the Blessed are known far and wide for their scents and their smells and their fragrances because of all the flora and fauna here. Moving up and around again to the next landmass at a lightning pace, I know, but there's so much lore that I can't cover it all. I apologize. But next we have the continent Quiriva Cibola, also known as the Land of the Lizards. This entire area is full of a vibrant and rich culture. Fertile lands, beautiful scenery, and of course, lizards, and giant lizards at that. Tons of species live here. These places are said to be not too different from the tropical islands in the Caribbean from our Earth. The native peoples that live here are known to hunt and coexist at the same time with the lizards. The lizards are vibrant in their personalities, in their patterns, in their mating rituals. All of it is so unique. It's like an island of Komodo dragons and giant other flightless dragons and stuff. There's a group of people known as the Nashivoyo who live here, and they were said to come from the island of Madagascar from our Earth. Specific lizard species like the tattooed lizard, the shedskin lizard, and Many other types of actual specific breeds live here on the islands, and they're all hunted or farmed or used in various ways and methods. The people that inhabit these islands are also known for their equality in their politics and their economy between men and women. Even though they're kind of like tribal and a little bit underdeveloped, they still have great ideas of equality, and the women are able to buy and own their own land and property and farms and that kind of thing too. Good for you guys. Continuing to move along, below this ice wall, we have the next huge continent on the list, known as Pitatia, or Pitatia. This grand mass is located beyond the opening of the Leviathan's Gate, and it was settled by the Ottoman explorers of the ancient ages. This land is the first prehistoric type mass that I've talked about today, and those early explorers from the Ottoman Empire, they found dinosaurs and giant brontosauruses type things walking around here as well. The land is covered in deserts and forests and bogs and other swamps. Armored sauropods walk the plains with their clubbed tails, and ankylosaurus type creatures that are known as pangolins live here as well. Gigantic crocodiles swim in the swamps here and up the streams, and massive man-sized lemurs leap through the trees. It's pretty much just like the old dinosaur days that you'd see from a movie or something.
Yeah.
Giant horned frogs range the plains and the prairies, and large birds fly through the sky and blot out the sun. Huge wild hogs live here as well, and these are a big nuisance because they burrow underground. That's how they travel. And because of this, massive sinkholes and valleys form. They kind of act like big worms or something. The people who live on this continent to this day are from all over our Earth, and they're descended from tons of different people. Asia and Europe and the Americas and all that stuff. This land marks that quintessential land beyond the ice wall vibe, these lush forests, these vast burning deserts, with these huge dinosaurs that just walk across the plains. That is what this place is. That is Pitatia. Now, right above Pitatia, as we go up, is the huge landmass known as Zerzura. Now, Zerzura is said to be about the same landmass size as real-life Europe, so it's a pretty expansive area.
It's called God's Hallucination. That's a badass name.
Misty, temperate woodlands and highland deserts and swamps and mountain ranges and vistas and archipelagos, all sorts of environments are located here in this giant continent. Zerzura is known for its many ideas and perceptions that kind of change reality. As I said at the beginning, the further down you go in the snowman structure of Earth and Atlas and Akupara, the less that reality is real. The more magic and strange things and enigmatic findings that can occur, and that's exactly the case here. Zerzura has kind of gained a reputation with sailors and travelers and explorers as another place that you just cannot trust. The physical world can distort here, and the reality that you see might not actually be reality. And on that same note, Zerzura is home to a ton of different sentient and sapient animals and creatures that add to that deception. The main case in point is the Zerzura blimye, which is this sapient, large creature that walks around. This is the first example of a blimye, which is those creatures that don't have a head, and their facial features, where they should be, are on their torso. These are the only non-human, sapient, sentient entities that I've covered so far, and they're the main ones here on these islands. Zerzura is nicknamed God's Deception, and that's because of the factors that I just mentioned. The reality of things here is just not true. You could see one thing, but it's not actually occurring. There's things without heads walking around, and people in places that don't exist, and entire civilizations that you can't trust. It's a beautiful land, but a mysterious land. Gigantic and enigmatic mushrooms grow, and they have different effects in the environment than if you eat them, and it's just a whole ordeal. Continuing up and around the wall, we have reached the huge, massive landmass of Geminia. Now, Geminia is physically the second biggest continent, the whole thing together, that I'll be talking about today, and with it comes a share of eccentricities that are beyond weird. In Geminia, everything comes in pairs, so every natural occurring thing has two of them. If there's mountains, there's two identical mountains. If there's creatures, there's two identical creatures. If there's plants, and so on and so you get it. Geminia is also home to one of the only sentient, non-human beings in the entire Atlas world, and those are known as the Zhuado beings. Now, these beings are known for their peaceful nature and their ability to reconcile with their enemies. They sort of look like hippo elephant type creatures with short legs and long trunks off the front of their face. They also are known for their long tongues. They are extremely kind and social creatures, and despite the fact that they're not human, they can interact with humans pretty well. I find it kind of wholesome that in the lore, if you read it, these creatures they're sentient, so they think like humans do, sort of, and they try to do these daily tasks like live life, but they can't because they're kind of clunky and they have these long tusks and tendrils and stuff. So they oftentimes have to help each other out because they just love each other so much as a race, as a being. So they always help each other out doing these tasks, and I thought that was pretty wholesome. When the continent of Geminia was first explored and first found many moons ago by the Spaniards that colonized it, Zhuado beings were almost wiped out through hunting to complete extinction. Geminia is home to so many different ethnicities from our world, and it's all very specific. You can see on the map that I'm showing you right now. I can't get into it all. There's not enough time, but just know that a lot of people from our world and their descendants have settled here. Strange horned fish swim in the water around Geminia, and gigantic, sentient, elephant-like things walk around the actual land here. It's a very strange place, made out of pairs and doubles, and everything is two. Very weird. We've now made our way all the way around Atlas, all the way up to the Serpent Gate. This is where the land of the Dishipossu and the Xenonesia and Aten lie, which those are very famous in the lore, and I'll of course be getting into all of them. Dishipossu is a troubled landscape full of hazards and fortifications and an environment that really just seems like it hates everything. It's like they're naturally built to deter those from landing on it. There's sharp, rocky outcroppings, there's poisonous snakes and frogs, there's beaches that you can't land on, there's whirlpools. It's all very pirate type deal. In fact, they're so dangerous that they're often used as prison colony islands from some of the other continents here. That's how bad we're talking. The only people who dare live on these dangerous islands are the native people of the Mosanosans. Now, these Mosanosans formerly used to live in Xenonesia before the Blimier War, which I'll kind of get into later. This war essentially saw these humans leave those islands because the Blimiers ran them out, and because of that, they came here as a last-ditch effort. These people were typically Russian or Portuguese or Spanish in descent. All the islands in this little chain here have their own lore and their own histories and such like that too. You can look at the full map if you want all of that. Moving up and over once more to the massive cluster of islands known as Xenonesia. Xenonesia is known far and wide for its wildlife that will seek to attack anything that moves, as well as the strange inhabitants that live on the islands themselves. Beings known as Blimiers, which I've mentioned several times in the earlier parts of this video, those are the beings with the heads that are on their torsos. They inhabit these islands and these archipelagos. Now, real life stuff here, Blimiers are actually based off of some early human history accounts of desert people that were cataloged, so I think it's pretty cool that they've tied that into this lore here. It's pretty neat. But the history of the Blimiers in the Beyond the Ice Wall lore is kind of sad, actually. I got pretty teary-eyed reading it. It begins in 1200 BC, long before the Blimiers were even created or anything like that. There were native people that lived in this island, and there were other explorers coming in from different parts of the world. Before you knew it, the native population of all the various islands were fighting blood, tooth, and nail with all the explorers that were coming through as well, and it was all chaos. Death and warfare was commonplace. Tribesmen fought tribesmen, and family fought family. It's said that no head was safe from noose nor axe in that time. But that all changed when a very enigmatic and powerful being came to Xenonesia and attempted to rule all of it. The only name this entity has is Sfath, which is S-F-A-T-H, and when Sfath arrived to the Isles, more death ensued, and he attempted to rule with an iron fist. He was feared far and wide for his madness that he brought to the lands of Xenonesia. His torture and his decapitations of the tribesmen and the warring people was really just terrifying for everybody. He attempted to essentially bring all of Xenonesia to heel using these horrible tactics of torture and control. Since he was an extraterrestrial, powerful being, he kind of had the power over these tribesmen to do so, though, in his mind at least. But during all this beheading, specifically, over the decades and centuries, Svath ended up actually creating the Blimier population here. As I said, these beings don't have a head, they just have where their head should be, their face, is on their torso, and it seems that they've evolved because of the decades and centuries of Svath's decapitations. That's the entire reason they exist. The Blimier over time evolved into these really strong, fast creatures that were physically just a sight to behold. They were very muscular and tall.
There's a lot of ways you can hurt yourself with the neck and the head, so having that not as a liability to worry about, I could definitely see that yielding a much faster and stronger being.
And they had bone plates in their weak spots. Essentially, Svath created a very powerful being that did not want to be controlled. If you've ever heard of All Tomorrows, this is pretty similar to that. Eventually, Svath saw what he was doing, and he saw that he created something that he probably couldn't stop, so he ran away and fled in disgrace. But only after realizing that he created a land of monsters and odd things and things that weren't natural. Twisted, horrifying beings that don't even resemble what they were is what he created. He essentially tried to play God, and he failed. And what was left was the Blimiers. After Svath left, the Blimiers fought whatever remaining head people, which were people with heads, that were left. They had a bloody, bitter rivalry, and they hated each other. But of course, since the Blimiers were physically bigger, stronger, more adept to fighting, they won, and they forced these people off the islands to go to other places. Like I mentioned earlier, some of them went to those prison islands, which I feel bad for those people, but whatever. That all happened decades ago. In modern day, the Blimiers are pretty peaceful. They share cultures with the head people, and they share customs as well. And in the modern day, the islands of Xenonesia are a calm place to be, a cultural paradise actually. The climates are nice, there's beaches, there's deserts, there's forests, there's everything you could ask for. But essentially, the Blimiers are the most notable thing about Xenonesia. They look pretty cool, they're pretty legendary, especially in the world beyond the Ice Wall fandom. Now, we've almost made it all the way back around Atlas, all the way to Thoth again. We've almost made the full circle, and the only thing standing in our way is the last large landmass of this video, Aten, also known as the Grand Orchestra. Aten is known very widely for how rich it is. It is a very vibrant place full of wealthy land and wealthier people. It's said to be the most wealthy land in recorded history from a natural standpoint, and the people and the beings that live there have definitely...
Okay, so now it all makes sense. It did seem like there was little to no people, like very, very few instances of culture and civilizations throughout all of these landmasses. But I guess it does make sense if there's one big one that has all the resources and all the civilizations. Why force inhospitable locations? All right, so that does make sense then.
Taking advantage of that. It's also absurdly beautiful. It smells amazing. There's birds and flowers and big giant trees, and the land is known for how harmonizing the birds sing together. Some of the songs the birds chirp are so beautiful that it brings people to tears. And the entire continent is just said to be musical. You can hear it when you're there. It's just this amazing, lively music from the woods. The birds are chirping, the wind is blowing. Some people even say when the wind blows, it blows music. The native peoples of this island are unlike any other place in Atlas as well, and it's because they're all goblins or gnomes or orcs. Short people of stature, yes, but also full of enigmatic powers and magic. The inside lands of Aten are dotted with deserts and dangerous areas, while the outsides by the ocean are more safe and more tropical. The edges and some of the middle is where you'll find those birds and those beautiful harmonies they sing. As you can tell, the birds and the fowls are the most popular and famous thing from Aten. But you can kind of think of Aten as this fairy tale land where there's gnomes and there's magic and there's orcs and goblins. There's tunnels, there's mushrooms, there's leprechauns. Anything like that exists here. These things are human in nature, but they're also as far away from it as you can get. They have these mystical properties and these ancient languages they speak. Aten is also home to a ton of other kind of creatures as well, like giant rats and giant lizards and giant ostrich type things. But But again, their main thing is the birds. The birds are very big there. Now, around the land masses of the last few islands and continents I've talked about, like Xenonesia and now Aten, giant beings swim in the ocean. Large horned whales and strange mosasaurus-looking creatures are seen all the time. Whirlpools and rifts and all sorts of things like that are very common in these oceans, especially the closer you get to the ice wall. But all of these lands that I've discussed today have their own people, their own history, and their own culture. I've said it a million times. You're probably sick of hearing it, but it's true. And I've gone over as much of it as I can physically in this video for it to make any sense at all. I will be going over everything about the second planet beyond the ice wall, known as Akupara. I'll be talking about its continents, its lore, its entities, its creatures, its history, its religion, its psychedelic effects, and every single thing that comes along with it. Akupara is 6 to 7 times the size of Earth and 3 to 4 times the size of last video's planet, Atlas. So you know you're going to be in for a crazy one today. It's full of its own slew of oddities. Giants, esoteric creatures, ghosts and goblins, nomads, human dragon hybrids, flying people. It's literally going to get crazy. So to begin, I want to go over Akupara as an entire planet, explain how big it is, how many continents there are, and what you might expect before we get into those lands and creatures. As you know, in this entire world beyond the ice wall theory, the planet that we know, Earth, is not actually alone. It is on top of a 3-planetoid snowman structure called Gaia. Earth sits on top, Atlas sits in the middle, and on the very bottom, this gargantuan oval-shaped planet is Akupara, what we're talking about today. And as I said in the intro, Akupara is 6 to 7 times bigger than Earth, which means even a continent that looks small here is going to be bigger than almost all of ours on Earth. Akupara can be accessed via several entries through something called the Montane Ring, which is kind of like the ice wall of Atlas. You see, because to get to Atlas from Earth, you have to cross through our Antarctic Ice Wall. But to get to Akupara from Atlas, you have to cross through this very treacherous ring full of mountains and canyons called the Montane Ring. Now, in the Montane Ring, there are several different lands and peoples and lore, but I will be explaining that part in the final, which is part 3, next episode. This specific episode is just about the lands and creatures and everything else of inside Akupara, which means that part 3, the next part, I will be going over the outer wastes, Hyperborea, Asgard, as well as the lore and the creatures and the lands inside the Montane Ring. So if you want a part 3, you want to hear all that, leave a like, that'll be the final part. But anyways, the name Akupara actually has some real life implications, because in Hindu mythology, Akupara translates to the turtle that holds the world, or the world-bearing turtle. And in depictions of Akupara as it relates to the Hindu religion, you can see that this giant turtle is holding the world on its back, just like how Akupara in the world beyond the ice wall is holding up Atlas and Earth. Akupara is far more mysterious and esoteric and magical than Atlas and Earth combined. If you remember in the very first part, I talked about a substance called ether, which you all corrected me over and over again. It is not pronounced aether, it is pronounced ether. I'm sorry, but the A shouldn't be there. But if you recall, ether is denser at higher elevations, meaning up on Earth here on top of the snowman, there's more of it. Atlas, there's a little bit less, but by the time you get past the Montane Ring to Akupara, nothing makes sense. The magic that's kind of subdued in Earth and on Atlas is not subdued here. It is free-flowing to everybody. There's an estimated 6 billion people that are living in Akupara, which might not seem like a lot, but actually most of the lands aren't even fully discovered yet because the planet is just so big, and half of them aren't even explored. So we don't know if that's true or not. Throughout this video, you will notice a massive influx and spike in esoteric and ethereal beings, creatures from the underworld, god-like entities, sentient mammals and birds and plants, and things that just generally are actually wild. The landscapes here are even greater and older and more ancient. Everything is primordial, almost. And this is because Akupara was the first of the 3 globes to form, so it is by far the most ancient, by far the oldest, and people estimate that it formed itself over 4 billion years ago. So essentially, if you watched part 1 and you thought like magic little gnomes and goblins and blimiers were crazy and weird, and you thought the lore there was weird, you're in for a treat with this one, because Akupara makes that seem like it's all normal. Akupara also has a much higher biodiversity rate with its flora and its fauna. Its climates and its continents are grander and more different, and a lot of the stuff you're about to hear you really can't even comprehend. But I'll do my...
This is so cool. This almost feels like when I would get a fresh video game, like old school before the internet, where I'd get a video game and I'd have the crazy instructional manual with the description, the story, and the lore, and the characters, and particularly the big one that comes to mind is Diablo 2. But in general, the excitement of all of this fresh new ideas and concepts, this is so cool.
My best. So pretty much that was the basic overview of Akupara. It is a massive behemoth planet full of massive behemoth things. Magic, spells, cosmetology, the ethereal plane, it's all here. And the creatures, the lands, the lore, the history matches that. Very little is actually documented about this planet, and that's because very few earthly explorers can even make it here. I mean, they're lucky enough to get to Atlas, much less the planet beyond it. So there will be a couple continents that don't really have much lore, but I have asked the creator of the map and several other lore contributors, and they've given me some lore to fill you in on. But with that groundwork settled, let's get into the creatures, the lands, the lore, and all that sweet stuff of Akupara.
I like this guy. He's a good creator.
So as of this video, Akupara has 66 named land masses. Now for reference, the entire planet of Atlas had 59 named land masses, and Atlas was fully explored pretty much. Akupara is not. The first continent for the video is known as Abraxas, also known as the Glowing Isles. Now this landmass is located across the montane ring from Aten. If you remember Aten from Atlas, this is kind of across the ring, directly away from it. The lands of Abraxas are constantly lit and illuminated from itself. Everything here glows, everything sparkles, and everything has this magical effervescence. The air and the plant life here is temperate and moderate, and it sits in kind of a tropical environment. It's located in the Calamiceous Ocean, and like I said, this is one of those islands that doesn't have too much lore about it, but what we do know is that it glows. Now, Abraxas sits in the Calamiceous Ocean, and you'll notice that here in Akupara, there are many more oceans and bodies of waters than there were in Atlas. On the southeastern point of Abraxas, a kingdom with peoples called the Red Israelites reside. There's this massive capital city there where the ruler of these people lives, and he's known as the Red King. Now, Abraxas as a continent is home to a very precious material known as Shamir. And this material is known to be able to cut through almost anything. It's this thick red glowy substance, and it's highly sought after. And these Red Israelites, they've essentially...
Philosopher's Stone? That's kind of what it reminded me of there.
Monopolize the production, sale, and gathering of this material, and that's how they became rich. It's kind of similar to refined metal. It could also be akin to like Valyrian steel from Game of Thrones, if you know what that is. But the Red Israelites have a monopoly on mining it, and therefore they have sold this material to everybody else at a high price to get rich. It's kind of like America with oil. But that's all on the south part of Abraxas. The north part is kind of like plains lands and mountainous regions, and in these areas, entities known as monopods live and roam. Now, monopods are like a devolved, mangled humanoid. They have one large leg and one large foot on the tail end of it, and they kind of just hop around on that foot. Their bodies are small and malnourished, and their heads are also small. Now, if you remember from part 1, our old pal Sfath created the Blimier population, those giant creatures with the eyes on their chests. He might have had a hand or two in creating the monopods as well. So you're going to hear more about that later. Moving down to the next landmass for today, we have U, which is just U with 2 dots over it. This is a much smaller landmass than Abraxas, and U is pretty much only inhabited by the monopods that I just described. Monopods are pretty peaceful and temperate, but they will attack if threatened, and they do roam the entire island. Other than this, the lands of U are pretty much just tropical and rainforest filled. not much is known about them. Chia is next, and it's spelled Xia, but I think it's pronounced Chia, so just bear with me. This place is known as the Palace of the Jade Dragons. The continent itself is massive. It is very expansive. It's bigger than Abraxas, bigger than you combined. The people who live here in Chia are from the Garden Isles. They're kind of like transplants because they had to leave due to wars and stuff. Chia is a land of temperate and calm lakes and rivers and rolling hills. In the southern regions, that's how it is, but in the northern regions, there are deserts and highlands and dangerous places like that. Chia is also home to the original Chinese people that we know on Earth. In this lore system, people from Chia are the ancestors and descendants both of the original Chinese people. Now, as I said, the subname of Chia is the Palace of the Jade Dragons, and that's because of a single individual known as the Jade Emperor. Now, the Jade Emperor is a very powerful being who is not human. In fact, he is only one of 6 surviving members of a race called the Sumanites. Now, the Sumanites in this lore system were an ancient race of sentient, mammal-like lizard creatures. They had societies that were far more advanced than any human society ever was, but they almost all died out during the Great Dying that occurred millions of years ago. After this Great Dying, they were scattered from Earth to Atlas to Akupara, and they kind of set up camp wherever they could. Their societies were driven by pleasure and carnal desire. They didn't really have religion, they didn't have a greater purpose. They kind of just became so advanced that they gave into their own whimsy and their own carnal stuff. Anyways, this Jade Emperor is one of those creatures. He's one of the most powerful ones ever. Like I said, he's one of the 6 of those rulers. And he came to Chia and created this giant palace and these huge towers and walls, and he rules over the city to this day. Chia is steeped in mythos and legend in Akupara, and it's very widely known for its fame. It's got too much lore, can't cover it all, but what I gave you are the cliff notes. Thanks. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Moving even further south and at the speed of the Flash, we have Azania, also known as the Kingdom of Prestor John. Again, get your lore caps on. It's about to get wild. Azania is a long and skinny continent that kind of resembles the shape of Florida, or Italy almost. Long and thick rivers cut through the expanses and almost connect ocean to ocean. But the interesting part of Azania is not its rivers, and it's not its proximity to how it looks close to Italy. It's actually the name it's been given, the land of Prestor John. A race of people known as the Nubians live here in this land, and they have their own lore in and of themselves. But Prestor John has some interesting history on Earth, because in the medieval chronicles that we abide by, Prestor John was mentioned as this Christian ruler who dwelt and ruled and kind of was the king of these marvelous faraway lands. He ruled over strange lands with miraculous mythical beasts and dragons and half-human hybrids. Mythical creatures like sirens and harpies flew in the skies, and Prestor John kind of oversaw it all. And the lands here on Azania are called the Kingdom of Prestor John because of that. That's how these lands are. They're wild, they're untamed. Creatures with multiple eyes and multiple limbs, and giant lion-human hybrids. Harpies that fly in the sky, Nubians that live here too. Everything seems mythical. Azania sits on top of what is known as the Carousel Ocean, which is kind of this area where there's a bunch of different land masses that are all in a circle. But now we find ourselves in this Carousel Ocean. In the Carousel Ocean, there are several different land masses. Those are New Cahokia, Nuit, Iwas, Macro Micronesia, and Minerva. Sorry if I butchered those names. These are crazy things to say. New Cahokia is known as the Kingdom of the Mounds, and it too has really cool real-life lore. Those who live in New Cahokia are the descendants of the American Indian tribes known as the Cahokians.
Cool.
The Cahokian tribe from North America settled in the Missouri area near St. Louis, and they were known for having this gigantic city. It was a mega city that had never really been seen before. And when it was discovered, it was kind of just in mounds and ruins. The Cahokians eventually sailed through the ice wall, sailed through the Montane Ring, and they ended up here in New Cahokia to settle these fertile, rainforesty lands. Nuit is next, and it's called Heaven's Gate, which I'm pretty sure that's a cult, but I digress. It is an incredibly small island off of the coast of Iwas, and there's really not much labeled about it. There is a giant pyramid in the center of the island though, and worshippers of strange deities go there, apparently. Legends of winged creatures fly around Nuit, and other beasts that seem like they're right out of Revelations in the Bible. Sorry, it's Revelation. In Earth's history, Nuit is the goddess of the space and the heavens in Egyptian mythology, so that's undoubtedly where this name came from. Much of Akupara and its names and its lore revolves around Norse, Egyptian, and American Indian style mythos and legends and lore, and you'll see that as we go on. Iwas is next, and I think that's how you pronounce it. Iwas is often nicknamed as the levitating continent because it does just that. This massive landmass literally floats around the eastern portions of Akupara. It is the biggest floating landmass in all of the entire Gaia planetary body. Nothing even comes close to it. And it's never been set foot on or touched by a human. Many people say that Iwas is hundreds of billions of years old. It is an ancient, religious, esoteric place. And everything that goes on there is really unknown and enigmatic because you can't see it. The only place where you can even kind of look over at it is if you go to the pyramid in the middle of Nuit and climb to the very top of that pyramid. You can kind of see over the floating continent. But even then, no human's ever been there, so we don't know what goes on.
So is flying not an option in this area then? Presumably you can get around by water, by sea travel, but if nobody's been up there, then that means that there's no flying of any sorts. Interesting.
What we do know is that Iwas seems to be evolved in some way, like greater versions of people live there. Strange flying beasts and griffins and angels roam the air. But again, no one's even set foot there, so we don't know if that's true. Over to the left is the continent of Minerva, also known as Croatoan. Now, Minerva is a very interesting land because, again, it is full of a bunch of descendants of Native American tribes. If you've ever heard of the lost colony of Roanoke from real life or the story and legend that it is, you probably heard of the word Croatoan. If you've ever been to the Outer Banks in real life, the highway that runs through it is called the Croatoan Highway as well. You're real if you know that one, by the way. I'm sure you've heard of the legend of Roanoke and the missing colony, but essentially, an entire colony went missing after the guys who were running it left for 2 years. They came back, all they found was carved into a tree on the outside of the place, the word Croatoan, which is an Indian band of people, but they were never seen again, and their families were never seen again either. Somehow those peoples got here to Minerva in Akupara, and don't ask me how, but they did, and the remnants and remains of the Croatoan tribe is here. And finally, completing the Carousel Ocean is the continent of Micronesia, the land of the sandstone towers. The continent, as its name suggests, is very dry, very arid, and full of sand and sandstone. Along its eastern coast, it's almost like a desert biome from Minecraft. Giant sandy temples are dotted there. Sand traps, quicksand, sandy mountains, sandy caverns, it's all sand. But on the other side, the west side, rich forests dot the landscape. At this point in the video, we've gone over about 1/4 of all the land masses in Akupara. Buckle in, you're doing great, I hope your brain hasn't exploded yet. At this point, we're in a place called the Circumscribed Ocean, and in this ocean, gigantic krakens are said to be. Strange fish-human hybrids have also been seen and reported, and you do not want to sail in these waters unless you absolutely have to. Beyond the Circumscribed Ocean, though, is 2 continents known as Weldrum and Polybius. Both of these continents are jam-packed with their own lore and mythos. Take a shot every time I say lore in this video. And the 2 continents are actually nearly connected by a series of archipelagos that almost reach each other from their coasts. Polybius is known as the Psychonauts Oasis, which is a crazy name that goes kind of hard. The word psychonaut refers to the altered state of consciousness that humans attempt and try to reach by doing deep meditation or taking something.
It's actually a video game as well, really enjoyable, one of my favorites growing up.
Some sort of substance that makes you trip, pretty much. And as such, the land here at Polybius, the Psychonauts Oasis, is just like that. Everything is like a gigantic trip. Everything's colorful. Large plants emit glowing texture. There's swirls in the sky. The land itself is almost a drug. Colorful creatures with billions of wings and eyeballs float around the skies. Magic is very prevalent here, and spells pretty much exist in the open. Entities of the ethereal realm walk freely here. Angels and demons and gods and deities literally just walk around. The land itself is warped and glitchy, and the sky is colorful and non-real. Flying creatures can just walk right through solid objects, and it literally seems like you are tripping on the craziest trip of your life.
Wow.
Nothing makes sense, yet at the same time, everything makes sense. On the left side of Polybius is the Scorched Wastes, which again is a crazy place that I'll explain in part 3 when I explain all the wastes. Veldrum, or Weldrum, is nicknamed Destiny Manifest, and this is that sister continent that is nearly connected to Polybius. Now, Veldrum is very interesting because it was colonized and kind of found by a group of people that I've already talked about. If you remember the giant continent of Aten that I mentioned last video, then you will remember its inhabitants. Goblins, orcs, gnomes, hobgoblins, and things like that were all that roamed the expanses. And the reason all of the creatures in Aten were kind of short and stumpy is because there wasn't enough natural resources to make them grow fully, so over time their bodies kind of developed the ability to not grow. However, these goblins and a group of these orcs and gnomes and stuff eventually left Aten and sailed all the way through the Montane Ring and found Veldrum. They settled it, they colonized it, and they began to grow. Veldrum is a world and a continent that is massively rich in nutrients. The trees here are huge. They bear fruits and vegetables. The grass is plentiful. The wheat is plentiful. And these small people from Aten found this place, and they grew. And they grew, and they grew, and they grew, and they grew even more. And now they are giants. That's right. The people that were short and goblins from Aten came here, and now their descendants are gargantuan behemoths. The name Weldrum itself actually directly translates to the land of trolls, which is exactly what it is. Across the expanse of Weldrum, these giants roam, and they live amongst the huge trees, the caverns, and chasms. It's literally the perfect place to grow a civilization. Good job, gnomes. Below the continents that I just mentioned, there's literally none for thousands of miles. It's just ocean. Specifically, this huge ocean expanse is called the Archipelago Ocean, and that's because it's an ocean full of little archipelagos. Got it? None of these land masses here have anything about them. I don't know the lore about them, but they're little tiny islands. So do with that what you will. Moving around to the bottom of the map, we have the land of Scylla and Charybdis, home of the Harpies.
No kidding.
This is when that awesome mythology comes into play. Strap in for this. The name Scylla and Charybdis might sound familiar to you if you know Greek legend and mythology, because both of these beasts are from the mythos there. Scylla is kind of like a half lizard, half woman creature that hides on the one side of a body of water. And Charybdis is this other giant creature that creates whirlpools with its mouth, with thousands of rows of teeth. If you've seen Percy Jackson, you've seen something similar to Charybdis. Scylla has dog heads sprouting from her body and a strange human top with a lizard back, and Charybdis is just an eldritch horror. So, essentially the entire tale of Scylla and Charybdis is in the Odyssey, and it symbolizes being between a rock and a hard spot, because they have to sail through the lands of Scylla and Charybdis, where they're kind of in between. And that's exactly what these two sister islands or sister continents are. The continent itself is very mountainous, very airy, kind of high in elevation. And the things that live here are harpies. Harpies are creatures with the bodies of birds, but with the head and neck of a human. So they have wings and they have multiple feet and stuff, but they have the head and kind of the shoulders of a human. These harpies live up in these high mountains, in these caves, and in these caverns, flying back and forth to the rivers below to catch their food. Below Scylla and Charybdis is the Draconic Isles, which if you know what Draconic means, you know again, this is a dangerous place. Like the name suggests, this island cluster is a hot, fiery, magma-filled place full of dragon lairs. Huge fireworms and bloodworms and serpents and wyverns and dragons as we know them fly around the expanses and live in the volcanic ash. Active volcanoes constantly erupt and smoke here, and fire naturally comes from the ground. This place is also home to some kind of living fire, which moves around like a beast, but acts like fire. Not much is known about the Draconic Isles, but what is known is that no human should ever set foot there if they want to make it out alive and don't want to get eaten by a fireworm. Over to the right is another interesting place known as Glarnia, the Lost World. This is a huge continent, one of the biggest in all of Akupara, and it's been made famous due to the almost storybook aspect of it. It is a prehistoric nightmare with giant expanses where human and animal hybrids run free. Gargantuan snakes and beasts of the field with wings. The lands here are lush with vegetation and forests, and mist rolls over all of them. It's a very, very princessy type place. Huge ancient castle ruins are here as well, and if you've ever seen the movie or read the book Narnia, this is essentially what it's like. The creatures here can be sentient, and they can speak, and they can connect with people. And as such, human and animal hybrids are a pretty common thing. Above Glarnia is Aurora, the Mountains of Kong, Lalam, and Siwa Sigwo. No written lore is available about those places I just mentioned. They're kind of unfamiliar to people and travelers. The only information we can gather is from their names and their nicknames, their sub-names. So Aurora is titled the Audience of Lights, so I'm assuming that the sky opens up to the Aurora Borealis, kind of like it does in the northern areas of the world. The Mountains of Kong, I don't know what that means. Does King Kong live there? Who knows? I don't have an idea. And Lala, or Lale, or Layla, is the land of slumbering giants. So that's cool. Maybe there's giants there. And Siwasigyo is titled the home of the Flaming Emperor. So that's all we know. A lot of the lands in Akupara are just kind of known in legend. They haven't really been fully mapped out, because why would you? You'd probably die if you tried. At this point, we're pretty much halfway done through the entire world. We're making good progress. Let's keep going. And it's also at this point when the continents and the lands and the islands will begin to have scant lore, where not much is documented about them, not much is researched about them, and all that we know are kind of whispered wives' tales of what goes on. Now, if you're looking at this map right here, you might think that I'm going to go over Atlantis next, because it's kind of the next thing, but Atlantis is connected to the Wastelands. And I will not be going over the Wastelands until part 3, the next part, the final issue of this series. Continuing along upwards, we have New Taurid, aka Gone with the Wind. So Taurid itself in the world beyond the Ice Wall doesn't really have any written lore. There's no page about it, there's no documentation, but it's referencing something that happened in real life.
Yep.
And this is a mystery in and of itself, and it might be a future video of mine. This comes from an urban legend / possibly real story from real life called The Man from Taurid. The story goes like this. A man named John Zegris was a person back in the 1960s who landed in Tokyo, Japan, and was a white Caucasian. He got off the plane, they were asking where he was from and where he's headed, and he said that he was from a place between Spain and France called Taurid. Except if you know anything about geography, that doesn't exist. The Japanese officials were pretty confused when he said he was from this place. Then he proceeds to pull out a passport that said he was from Taurid, and he opened up the passport book, and lo and behold, other places had stamped approval and accepted the passport, almost as if it was proving that Taurid was a real place. The Japanese officials then went to go get a map and show this guy that Taurid isn't a real place, and they opened the map up and they pointed to Andorra, which is the only place between Spain and France. And the guy got offended, got angry at them. He thought they were playing a practical joke on him by saying that his home country didn't exist. He got kind of aggressive. Yeah. And then eventually the Japanese officers that were at the airport there kind of agreed to take him under protective custody, kind of take him to this hotel, keep him monitored, and just see what's going on. All of that's good and well until the next morning, they went to his room and he was gone. And every single piece of evidence that he was there was also gone. His bags, his clothing, his passport vanished from the room, which was under guard. Some people believe this man was a time traveler, and he was from some era when Taurid existed. Some people believe he slipped into an alternate dimension where Taurid was Andorra. But what if none of that's correct? What if Torrid was real? It just exists only in Akupara. And this is where it exists over here. New Torrid. I like that theory. It sounds pretty cool. Moving up and around, we have...
And given that that's part of the lore is how crazy and how magical things are out there, I guess it would make sense for somebody from New Torrid to somehow teleport all the way out there and back.
Have Hallucination, Psychonographa, and the Ascending Isles, as well as Sprenesia. No written lore exists about these places. Once again, no one would dare come here because why would you risk your life for a place called Sprenesia? The next big landmass of note is known as Horus. Horus is known as the Great Pillar of Akupara, and that's because it is a very ancient land that is thought to be one of the first ones, besides the floating island from earlier, to be formed here. It is a massive continent with a humongous lake in the middle of it. It's surrounded by tons and tons of little small island chains around it, like the Cup of Poseidon, Pantopica, Begel, and the Garden Isles, as well as the Inunaki Islands. Just a ton of different chains. All of these places and the borders of Horus are very tropical, very lush, and it's kind of like the Caribbean. Horus is an ancient land where strange humanoids walk around, and people don't really want to explore because of how ancient and old and prophetic it is. Moving along from Horus, way down out of the way, is the Isle of Man, also known as the Castaway Island. Few have literally ever dared to sail to the Castaway Island, because why would you? It's called the Castaway Island, and it's in the middle of the Sea of Shadows and the Abysmal Ocean. Why would you want to go there? The only lore we have about it is that the Isle of Man is like also a real island from Earth. That's all I know, though. Now we're entering the region and the general area of the great continent of Amun-Ra, the stronghold of the Nephilim. Around Amun-Ra, there are thousands of islands and archipelagos and chains like this. Telenesia, Heterotopia, Singularis, the Comatose Coast. There's tons of different places to explore around this gigantic continent. Now, obviously, the name Amun-Ra itself comes from the Egyptian folklore and histories. Amun-Ra is a very famous, very notable god in their religion, and it's kind of this fusion between the sun and death and life. So this place, this Amun-Ra continent, is teeming with life. The sun is bright, the plants are huge, and as its subtitle says, it is the foreground of the Nephilim, which of course is a reference to the Bible. The Nephilim are the children that angels had with earthly women. These are said to be large, giant creatures with ethereal power almost, and they roam the lands of Amun-Ra. There's colonies of them here, and that would explain where they went from real life, because they're not here. Comatose Coast is a place that puts you to sleep. Its vibrations and its ecosystem relax you down and almost put you into a lower part of sentience. Teslanesia, which I think I called Telenesia earlier, I apologize, it's known for its electric currents that run through the ground and the beings here. Heterotopia is known as the lands of defiance, and that's for good reason. Heterotopic places in real life is a term used to describe cultural spots of disturbing or intense magnitude. Things that are incompatible with human social stuff, but yet they're there, like insane asylums, prisons, brothels, that sort of thing. The old saying goes is that in a utopia, everything is good. In a dystopia, everything is bad. But in a heterotopia, everything is weird and different. So just by the name of this island, you can tell how strange things are here. Winged lions and fish that can talk, and everything is just against reality here. Moving up and around further to the continent of Terra Nova, the New Earth. It's also known as the legacy of the Suminians. So again, I touched on it earlier, but the Suminians or the Suminites or whatever you want to call them are kind of this ancient sentient being that took the appearance of a mammal, lizard, reptile thing, but they were able to create culture and society, and they were greater than human societies. They were the most advanced civilization before the Great Dying occurred. Then, like I said earlier, once that happened, they got scattered everywhere. A lot of these Suminites came to Terra Nova, and they built it up. Now the ancient ruins of their cathedrals and their buildings and everything else is just here. And it's one of the last strongholds of the Suminian culture. Moving directly north is the continent of Eden, which, yes, that is the Eden from the Bible. The Garden of Eden. So in Earth's lore, the Garden of Eden is where life began. It's where God put Adam and Eve to live there, where there was no sin, no strife, and no turmoil. Eden was a lush and beautiful place with plants and animals and rivers and streams and mist. And this continent is no different. Eden and Akupara is just that. It's kind of a vestige of what once the Garden of Eden was. Above Eden is the tiny island nation of the Oikosa, or the psychic melting pot. Just like many of the lands here, you can enter a state of psychosis and kind of enter the different dimension, the fourth dimension, because there's not enough ether to keep things normal. And that's especially the truth on this island. Warlocks and magicians and magics and studiers of the dark arts, you could say, come to this island. At this point, we reach another set of oceans where there's no lands of importance. This is where the Timorous Ocean and the Thousand Land Sea resides. Again, these waters are dotted with tales of sirens and gigantic flying whales and strange sea creatures that will eat entire ships. Atop the glacial oceans is the home of Formosa Ultima, the land of the broken moon. Now, the Formosa people are actually a colony on Earth that once inhabited a small region of Taiwan in the late 1800s. Other than that connection, I can't find any other lore about this area, other than that really cool name, the Land of the Broken Moon. That's pretty fire. Also, guys, we're bringing it back for part 2, the Mothman hoodie. Moving up along from Formosa is the continent of Umurangi, the lands of the Red Rain. Again, no lore is listed about it, but lands of red rain could mean two things. One, it just rains red. Two, it's blood rain, and people die there all the time. Whatever the case is, we don't know much about them. Moving around yet again, we find ourselves at the continent of Greater Lemuria. This is a very interesting region of Akupara, and that is because it ties directly into Earth. And let me tell you the story. Greater Lemuria is known as the fertile graveyard as it relates to the world beyond the ice wall, but in our Earth, Lemuria was actually a proposed continent to have existed between Madagascar and India. A man by the name of Philip Scatler came up with the theory that a place called Lemuria, a continent, a land bridge, if you will, once connected the island of Madagascar to the southern tip of the subcontinent of India. And he came up with this theory because there were lemur bones and lemur skeletons in that southern tip of India that matched directly to lemur bones and skeletons from Madagascar. The only problem is, how'd the lemur bones get there if there's an entire ocean separating them? So he came up with the idea that there once was a great continent called Lemuria that connected the two. However, later on in the 19th century, the theory of continental drift became widely accepted, and the belief in Lemuria disappeared, much like it was said to itself. But what if Lemuria did in fact exist, and it did drift just all the way through the ice wall and over to Akupara? That's what this theory says in the Beyond the Ice Wall lore. Greater Lemuria and Lemuria itself here in Akupara are full of biodiverse flora and fauna. Societies of mammals and reptiles and hominids and other sapient creatures all inhabit the hills. The remnants of some of the Sumanites live here as well. It also borders the wastes on one side. Lemuria is pretty cool. Maybe it was real, maybe it just ended up past the ice wall, who knows. On the northwestern tip of Greater Lemuria, in a little cove, lies an island nation known only as Patmos. Patmos is also, and more widely known as, the Fortress of Yakub. Okay, again, for the 15th time this video, the lore is about to get crazy. Don't click off yet. Put your tinfoil hat on. Let's talk about Yakub. So Yakub is a form or a derivative variant of the name Jacob from the Bible. If you know anything about biblical history, Jacob was the father of the tribes of Israel. But Yakub in this rite relates to the religion and the belief system of the NOI, the Nation of Islam. According to the NOI, now stay with me here, Yakub was a black scientist who lived about 6,600 years ago, and he actually created white people. They believe that only black people existed before Yakub created white people. Now, why did he create the white race, you might ask yourself? Let's see what the NOI has to say. It was said in the lore of the NOI, the actual real-life lore, that Yakub was born near Mecca, the Islamic stronghold. And he was born with this large, oversized cranium. His head was big. He kind of had like a little odd-shaped head. And because of this, the people near him bullied him, made fun of him, ostracized him, and were kind of like, ha ha ha. But the only thing is
Yakub was a genius. He was very smart for as long as anyone could remember, and he came up with this plan to get back at these bullies, to get back at these people who were kind of making fun of him, and his idea was to create a race of people that would enslave those people that were making fun of him. And according to the NOI, he left Mecca, sailed around all of Africa, and he ended up on an island off the coast of Greece called Patmos. On Patmos, he would begin his mad science experiments to create these people that would control the people that made fun of him. And eventually, he created white people. So in the Beyond the Ice Wall fandom, Yakub didn't go to Patmos by Greece, he came to Patmos in Akupara, and he created and did a bunch of like biology experiments and created other genes and other kind of hybrids. He didn't create white people in this theory, they're just using like the character and the pictures and the lore from real life. But Yakub here in the Beyond the Ice Wall is still a genius, still this mega genius that dabbles in biochemistry and the creation of clones and things like that. And that's what he does here on Patmos. He came to the islands of Lemuria and created human-animal hybrids, and he created new creatures. Kind of like Svath from earlier.
That's what I was thinking,
does that make sense? No? Me neither. Moving along at a rapid-fire pace, we find ourselves at the continent of Asclepia, the living hospital. Now, this is a nation of islands along these archipelagos in the Ocean of Destiny. Yet another ocean. The name, the Living Hospital, implies that the land itself is healing. It almost nurtures and cares and cures ailments just by you being there. Below that is Dovland, which is God's blind spot. That's his nickname. And Dovland has a pretty interesting lore that relates to real life as well. There's very little lore about Dovland from here in the Ice Wall, but real life Dovland was apparently a city.
This is a love letter to conspiracy theorists. This is amazing. There are so many little different additions and winks at different theories. This is so fun.
In Wisconsin that never actually existed, yet thousands of people believed that it did. People would swear up and down that they'd been there before, that they'd driven through it, that they had shirts and coffee cups from there. But when push came to shove, it never was real. Maybe it was nowhere to be seen because it was in Akupara, and it got transported out of our country by Hyperborea to get here.
Why not?
Above Dovland is the New Caribia, or also the Embassies of Akupara. Now, sadly, no lore exists about these places, but it's called the Embassies of Akupara, so I'm assuming there's some kind of governing entities or higher level consciousness people, gods, deities, that kind of thing, that live here and kind of pull the strings of what happens. I don't know, that could be wrong. Now we find ourselves in the Yakuruna Seaforest, which is a very intriguing place, unlike anything I've seen. It is an island nation surrounded by shallow water, but in the water, trees, animals, and other plants have adapted to grow underneath that water from the ground. The plant growth here is very thick. Trees sprout from the sand and grow through the salt water. Mammals walk on the ocean floor, and they can breathe oxygen somehow. The water here is crystal clear blue. The lands and the islands that are above water are constantly marshy, and they're almost sinking, it seems, and they're just floating around, held together by the roots of the trees that grow beneath them in the water. Next, we have the continent of Oracula, or Oracula, the land of the prophets. The main quirk of this place, besides its extreme biodiversity, is the presence of high strangeness. A psychological power runs through every single living thing here. It's kind of like the land of the psychonauts from earlier, Polybius, except this is way more powerful. It is said that every conscious mind, not just humans, animals too, that set foot on this island go instantly into deja vu and dreaming. Visions of the past, visions of the future, and visions of the present are constantly implemented into your brain once you get here. Again, this place is like a psychedelic trip, and somehow every single person, no matter what level of consciousness, is gifted higher reasoning and higher capabilities. So you could just have like a dumb animal, but they're enlightened because they've seen the light. The island is also connected to the prophet Nostradamus from real-life mythos. If you don't know anything about Nostradamus, he was essentially this kind of like future teller, this prophet that would write little poems and little stuff like this in ancient France, and he disappeared for a certain few years. Some think he came here and founded this island, or found this island, and that's where he got his visions and prophecies from. Moving over through yet another ocean called the Terminal Ocean, which, these names, man. We have the Great Expanse of Sequoia, the Forest of Giants. Now, you might have heard of the Sequoia National Park from real life, where the gigantic trees,
No kidding.
ferns, rivers, and everything grow in these huge groves. Been there a couple times myself, but this is kind of like that on steroids. The entire expanse of Sequoia here is primordial. It is ancient and it is dense. No sapient life like humans or higher evolved creatures live here because they simply couldn't compete with the natural beasts that roam the trees. The trees here are thousands of feet tall. They're massive, they're wide, they're kind of like the Avatar trees. The beasts here are giant tiger hybrids with wolves and giant sloths and huge lemurs and monkeys. These things are like 50, 60 feet tall, and they dominate the entire expanse of Sequoia. If you zoom up on the map here, you can see just how thick the dots of trees are. It's almost impassable. And if you kind of sent a person here, everything is so big, they couldn't even do anything. Saber-toothed tigers, crossbreeds between humans and tigers, massive birds with razor-sharp talons fly through the trees. It's like you're in Ark Survival Evolved, kind of.
Yeah.
Moving up to the very top of Akupara, we have the Sky Caverns. As of this video, the Sky Caverns don't have much documentation, frankly. But we do know what they're called by sailors and adventurers who go near them. People refer to it as the Labyrinth of the Glidelings. And if you look here on the map, if you zoom up on it, you can see that the entirety of the Sky Caverns is a rocky, mountainous, high and arid place with massive stone structures and columns and gorges and rivers and mountain ranges that these glidelings live through. What are glidelings, you might ask? Glidelings are intelligent flying creatures. Kind of similar to harpies, but less human. They have near the level of consciousness that humans do, but not quite. They're able to develop societies and able to live in big communities, but not reach higher levels of enlightenment like humans. Anyways, these glidelings glide through the big caverns and the huge rivers, and they catch fish, and they live in giant caves. Directly below the Sky Caverns, we have the land of Anubis. And Anubis is in the middle of this sort of rocky formation, this outcropping from the Montane Ring, which again, I'll explain all the lands and civilizations and creatures of the ring in part 3, if you want that. But Anubis is called the Super Colony, and that's because so many creatures and people live here. Not only because of its proximity to the Montane Ring, it's easier to get to, it's also kind of safe inside of the bay. It's way easier than sailing to the Isle of Man from earlier. But this little ring here has the Indigo Caverns, named Stacia, the Canals of Aten, Shambhala, the Gates to Agartha, all of which I'll explain in my next part.
Cool.
And the name might sound familiar to you, and that's because Anubis is a god or a deity in Egyptian folklore. Essentially, Anubis guides people to hell, or the underworld, and he kind of controls who goes in and out, and he also has some form of control and dominion over death. It's a pretty cool name for a pretty safe place. We're down to the last 5 named land masses for this video, guys. I've been recording for like 4 hours, but we're still good to go. To the left of Anubis and the Montane Ring is a place known only as Rephigia, a calm between 2 storms. This land is kind of like this peninsula sticking out of the Montane Ring, and it's just like its sub-name describes. It is a very calm, very peaceful environment full of soft rolling hills and no creatures that want to kill you. Frankly, it's safe here. There's giant flowers and turtles and dolphins that swim around the waters. There's literally no danger to come here, and because of this, people kind of just tend to come here and stay for a while. Now, I will be saving Robinsonia, the continent of the adventurer, for when I explain the Outer Wastes and the Montane Ring. I know it's not consistent because I've done things like Umurangi and Dovland, but this one has a lot more lore, and it involves a specific adventurer and explorer who has mapped out a lot of this, and I'll get into his story when I get into part 3. So, sorry. Across the sea from this are the lands of Alacaringa and the Maria Teresa Reef. Now, Alacaringa is called the Dreamlands. There's no lore about it. And the Maria Teresa Reef is, I assume, named after Maria Teresa. Below the reef is the legendary Jotunheimer, from Norse mythology. It is a gigantic conglomeration of several peninsulas that stick out into the ocean. Jotunheimer is, of course, an Old Norse word. You might have heard about it if you follow any of that mythology or anything, but essentially it translates to the land of the divine. In the creation story of some believers of the Old Norse religions, Jotunheimer was one of the first worlds that was created. It's not a place that's meant to be traveled by people though, and it's reserved for titans and high deities and stuff. This entire upper left quadrant of Akupara is heavily Norse inspired, with mythology and history and lore that leads to it. Jotunheimer is a vast, expansive place. It's full of strange entities from Norse mythology. I'll be explaining Asgard in the next video where I explain the entire wastes and the ring, because it's connected to it. The last two land masses for this video, finally at the end here, is Pays Dual and Amazonia. Now, Pays Dual is actually the bridge between land and sea, is what it's called. But that name is actually a Creole name from real life that means strange land. It's a direct Creole translation. And that's true of Pays Dual. It is very strange because it said that the beings that would live in the sea live on land, and the land creatures live in the sea.
Cool.
So here in these islands, fish, whales and sharks and krakens, they all walk on land. But mammals and trees and everything else, they live in the water here. Mammals have gills and fish have lungs. It is a strange land, just like the name suggests. And finally, we have the island of Amazonia, which is just off the coast of Asgard. If you've heard of the Amazonian legends from real life, this place is just like that. Gigantic trees, huge birds, large people, giants, wizards, and that kind of thing, they live here. And they kind of feast off of the magic from Asgard. But little and less is written about it in the annals of history. But as you can see by this video, Akupara is much crazier and much more esoteric, much more enlightened, you could say, than Atlas and definitely Earth. There are literal gods and deities that roam here, and lore that just goes absolutely hard, bro. Like Polybius being the Psychonauts oasis. It's an island that you just go to trip on. That's crazy.
That was a tremendous amount of work there. Massive props to this creator. As always, I'll go ahead and link it down below. As far as my thoughts on it, the amount of work that went into this is notable, and I just want to give a massive props to him. I am curious of a few things. How Agartha plays into all of this. It did seem like he went over somewhat of a capital city almost, with the surrounded areas enclosing it in. That seemed to be the big connection with Agartha there. So that's interesting that they have like a capital city of sorts. This makes me want to play a video game on it. Honestly, I would love to play an MMO or an adventure game of some kind that traveled through some of these areas. It's really, really cool. Some of them are a bit outlandish and don't seem realistic at all, obviously. But a lot of these seem somewhat plausible. I do wonder how flying works in this whole realm here, if perhaps there's some sort of prevention of flying of sorts. I'll definitely tune in to the third part here, but seeing as how we just came out with part 2 here, I wanted to cover both of them at once. Amazing job. All in all, really enjoyable. Link down below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in this long. It's been a fun ride together. Appreciate you guys joining me on it. Much love. Take care. Question everything. See you guys next time. Cheers.